First and foremost, I want to give the utmost praise to my God and my ancestors for laying the groundwork to get me to this point. And I also want to thank my living motivator, my daughter Ali, who is in the audience and traveled all the way from New York with me to be here, who will hopefully remain quiet, presenting. So today I want to start this experience with the end of my paper. I state, typically Black excellence denotes something almost dehumanizing, wherein the agent committing Black excellence or trying to reach its unrealistic goal often feels depleted and burnt out. Revisiting this work over a year later, I realized that this work was born through the experience as a graduate student from a particular socioeconomic background and navigating a particular experience as a Black single mother and full-time educator. What did I have to give, and of what do I owe to this idea and definition of Black excellence? This is how I situated myself to be in conversation at the table with Dr. Alain Locke and Dr. Anna Julia Haywood Cooper. So, they were both, as the screen says, they were both fortified by a deep personal faith that informed their professional pursuits. They were confident in their abilities and grounded themselves within their Black heritage. Their authenticity allowed them to showcase Black excellence uniquely and originally. This is a significant observation as it challenges the notion that social pressures might be disingenuous and that one can detach themselves from their community when they become excellent. At the time, I'm in the existential dilemma of being and navigating my being in spaces freely, but how my being and coming to be holds me to a level of responsibility, an inheritance and a long tradition tied up in this idea of Black excellence. So how can I continue to be authentic in my being? How do I unpack Black excellence in its loadedness? And what kind of educational legacy do I want and am called to be a part of? So I have here a quote of Black excellence. It's a term that is widely used to illustrate what it means to be successful, have high achievements, and display an ability of being a master in a field or subject. Okay, so as I've already said, it's a very loaded term. Some people like it, some people do not like this term. You utter it and you just think of whiteness, reaching this standard of whiteness, and that's what it means to be Black excellence. So I don't want to have Black excellence lost and be congruent to Black exceptionalism. And I think that if you do conflate them, you have these issues of racism, sexism, and other oppressive structures, and it will block the full potential of examining the belief that is inherent in Black excellence. So, for Locke and Cooper, being human means being actively engaged in your immediate surroundings first to improve conditions for your fellow man and woman. It is not to be confused with the exceptionalism that taints the idea of Black excellence and looks for people to consider themselves sufficient at all times. Striving for standards rooted strictly in individualism and the idea of white supremacy, an abstract oppressive ideal with real lived consequences. Cooper once stated, even Christianity is being brought to the bar of humanity and tried by the standard of its ability to alleviate the world's suffering, enlighten and brighten its woe. Cooper illuminates this ideal of humanity, a standard of care and liberation for all people through her faith, a standard that calls us to stand in solidarity for one another's liberation and ensure the viability of an interreligious community. Cooper and Locke's faith-based understandings of the world further influence their authenticity in their practice and in their being. So I began to sit with this idea during a heavy period of transition in my life, my career, and my semester as a scholar. What does it mean to believe? Belief. As an ESL teacher, I began examining to believe and belief. So noun and verb. In my paper, I state the word belief most commonly operates as a noun, and its meaning is an acceptance that a statement is true or that something exists. An additional meaning is trust, faith, or confidence in someone or something, to act and navigate the contours of reality into something surreal for their particular time. The verb form of the noun believe is believe. It is important to establish Alain Locke and Anna Julia Cooper's belief in Black excellence as an abstract noun with concrete, real sensory implications as they believe in the liberation of their race and promote themselves as vanguards for the self-definition of people and advancers of liberation for all humanity. So we talked about, as here, if you read the screen, I talked a lot about their faith. Anna Julia Cooper was a Christian, and Dr. Alain Locke was part of the Baha'i faith. So their faith was a strong foundation for how they navigated their lives as educators and community activists. Am I okay on time so far? Okay. Okay, so Jesus used illustrations, metaphors, hyperbole, and parables to test the hearts of those who listen to him. I often bring up this concept of voice and audience in my work as a scholar. The idea of humanity holds a pivotal position in the gospel of Jesus Christ, where he is depicted as an individual who stands with and among all people, irrespective of their flaws. He symbolizes the spirit of collaboration and unity among people from diverse backgrounds, working together in faith towards the common goal of human welfare. For Cooper, witnessing the work of liberation for all people that aligns with her faith is a source of comfort and inspiration. This overarching objective of freeing all individuals, regardless of their diverse characteristics, further motivates Cooper to embody the principles of a devout Christian. So we can see how belief is moving in Anna Julia Cooper's role as an educator. So here I'm going to read a little bit off the screen. So this practical proximity to the work enhances the way both educators develop their philosophies of education and how they interact with their community. They actively lighten the seemingly burdensomeness of being academically privileged by providing accessibility to the knowledge they receive. As they engage with their community, educators gain a deeper understanding of the challenges that people face on a daily basis. They are able to use this knowledge to shape their teaching practices and create a more inclusive and empathetic learning environment. By providing accessibility to their knowledge, educators can help to break down these barriers and empower their students to reach their full potential. Okay, so next. So another section in my paper. So we just moved through faith. We just moved from faith. And now we're on to inheritance. While Locke has been characterized as an elitist, it's important to recognize the complexity of his perspective. Rather than an out-of-touch elitist, he can be seen as an empathetic educator who strives to incorporate diverse voices and achieve heterogeneous harmony. For Locke, an elitist, a man with immense privilege due to his education and social status, it is radical for him to utilize a white man's voice in such a way to extend his reach out into the audience. Albert C. Barnes was his close friend. He was a white chemist, businessman, arts collector, and educator, and he spoke passionately in an article in the New Negro, and it was titled "The Negro Art in America," and it was written in 1920s. So by using Barnes to be the voice, he was able to help liberate more abundance and things into his community, because at that time, Locke had a lot of power and accessibility to different communities. So by him being able to be used, like what I'm trying to explain here is that Locke basically used Barnes as a tool so that he can have a wider reach, okay? So I hope that was clear. Inheritance constitutes both intangible and tangible ancestral matter, linking the stories of the present members on Earth with their ancestral counterparts who have passed on. So Locke was very interested in the African arts and the beauty that despite trials and tribulations and oppression, people of the diaspora are still able to create, and everyone in the world is drawn to us as creators despite the experiences we go through. So and that in itself is reason for us to believe that we have something, we have our own self-definition. We don't have to look outside of ourselves and our experiences for beauty and things like that. So Locke and Cooper, what I talk about in the paper is they rely on this memory, this revitalizing memory of remembering who we are, despite the continuous traumas and expressions that kind of like interlock on our community. And I say that, you know, with the foundation of their faith, that is what they lean on to strengthen this idea of Black excellence and belief. Okay, I'm gonna try to move as quickly as I can. Locke and Cooper consistently bring up the trials and tribulations of the ancestors and use their stories as motivating and edifying subject matter. It is a grave responsibility to be what Locke and Cooper understand as both your ancestors' wildest dreams and students of a hidden cultural past. With this inheritance, Locke and Cooper also show accountability for themselves and to the Black community. Cooper in particular, as a highly educated Black woman, may have felt a greater embodied sense of accountability for how she navigated within the world. Concerning intersectionality, a term used by Kimberly Crenshaw, Cooper, as an academically and socially educated Black woman, carried a great sense of service back into her community as she obtained certain privileges. Her faith also positioned her to be a benevolent figure with the confidence to speak out and up against injustice. Cooper has a complicated and unique identity as an educator and activist because of the intersections of her identity, but also because of the format of her work. Cooper is a talented orator, and she utilizes speeches to evoke intense feelings and critical thinking with her audience. A dean and a mother naturally find themselves managing, nurturing, assessing, advising, and cultivating a fertile ground for growth for their students and children. Cooper, being a woman, was precluded from occupying any leadership positions within her denomination of faith, and Locke was a Black man who identified as gay, and he was not always free to move with his true identity. Although people knew he was gay, he wasn't able to fully live in that expression at the times that they were living. Nevertheless, both of these intellectuals leveraged their experiences to create pathways for future generations. So a lot of Black academics, or just Black people in general who are very successful, they will oftentimes quote some of these people as the foremothers and the forefathers of how they're able to express and navigate within the world today and their identities. Locke and Cooper encourages us to remember the community and believe in its power, but moving closer to the people of the community and being with them. Cooper pre-checked her privilege and leveraged the quality of a potential conversation for a desired result as an early Black feminist skill that elicits a form of trust. So I talked about in the paper really quickly how she had to meet with a woman who was of a different socioeconomic status, and Cooper listened. She used the skill of listening to make sure that she can establish some form of trust so that she can actually have a conversation and get through to the mother and her children. So by doing that, that's a common skill that we use in Black feminist epistemology, is to listen and to form trust so that we can create our own standards here, because there's a lot of things that work against those identities, those intersectionalities. Trust that Cooper, like many other activist educators, can truly understand and seeks to be open to understanding the real life person they are dealing with in the present moment. So not looking at abstract people and potentials and hypotheticals, but looking at the person in front of you and listening to their lived experience and to see how you can help them by listening to them say how you can help them. Similarly, Locke checked himself of privilege in a sense and proclaimed, in a real sense, it is the rank and file who are leading and the leaders who are following. A transformed and transforming psychology permeates the masses. This preference for connectivity to the ordinary public to affect change in the everyday life of people is a rare characteristic in persons of both Locke and Cooper's social position. So I just wanted to end it here with this last slide and say that despite both educators living in an era of extreme oppression, they employ the power of belief, the noun belief, and they defined it as an acceptance that a statement is true, and they navigated their reality and transformed it into something surreal. Their experiences of intense struggle and oppression never hindered their belief or its manifestation as a driving force for transformation. This belief forms an aesthetic grounded in actual movement and rituals that bring the seen and unseen into reality. The belief asserts that Black excellence is accessible to all individuals within the community. And in fact, those situated within the margins bring a unique cultural richness and a vastness to the liberation of not only Black people, but to humanity as a whole. So hopefully today, by me standing here in pink and bringing my daughter to a philosophy of education conference, I have changed the way your mind has contoured around the idea of Black excellence, and I hope I've inspired you all to think about this practice when you work with students of color. Thank you.
Great, beautiful. And we have about 15 minutes for questions, comments, reflections, etc.
I have a question. Can I ask? Oh my goodness, so good. Thank you so much for everybody to push it out. While I was listening to Ms. LaBorde, I was struck by, first of all, the model that Black educators. I was going to say share because a lot of the times it's taken, but like the model that Black educators offer in their being and their practice. And thank you for pointing us to that. And when you were speaking, I was drawn to what you defined as their definition of what it means to be human. And part of it was being human was the responsibility that you inhabit and hold as part of a community, in relation to the community and so on. And for instance, in the practice of deep listening, etc., that these scholars demonstrated. And then I was thinking about the Turkey conversation, and then the ways in which these teachers, the way that these biases you were saying came out like blips, and you called them interruptions. And I wondered about the definition of what definition of human these teachers would have been holding on to. That, because I'm curious about like why the interruptions, and it's more of a question to y'all. Like, is the interruption, the way that you framed it, can you describe more why you called it an interruption? Because I was thinking about the difference between interruption and flow, right? So then there's flow where I'm loving on you. It seems like your presumption is that they want to love on these kids. And then there are these disruptive moments where their biases come out. Am I understanding the data correctly?
Yeah. So when we first conceptualized this idea of interruption, it was actually in a previous research where we were specifically looking at linguistic diversity, how these teachers, again, who are working with refugees and immigrants, how they were conceptualizing linguistic diversity in the context of mathematics. So while they're teaching mathematics, how they were thinking about linguistic diversity. And in their comments, we sometimes realized that when they were talking about children's math and their teaching practices, sometimes they were struck by some moments where language was becoming an issue. So we thought that like those moments are like interrupting their thinking a little bit, and those are the moments that like attract attention to itself. So you have to think about it while they're thinking about something else. So it is like this is how we like come up with this idea. And again, when we are like looking at this data this time, again we see that when teachers are like in the flow, talking about like their students, their good practices, families, these life events were happening, and their attention were like directed to those events. And what are those like? For example, anti-immigrant discourses, or scarcity, or some political discourses. And then those moments were kind of interrupting our discussions, and they were like commenting on those things. Actually, those were the moments where we could see their biases emerge. So we also saw those moments as like openings. So those interruptions were creating openings so that we could see what they think at a deeper level, so that we could talk about those things.
Yeah. Maybe I heard your question a little differently, but I think there's no real flow, right? Like these things that we conceive as flow is maybe like a pattern that we gotten used to, and like we think, okay, this makes sense, this is kind of what I expect. And I think the reality is that when you are teaching someone who has experienced forced displacement and war, there's nothing normal about that. So all of the times encounters that they are having with the students who are very different from them, they are opening up all of these sorts of interpretations. And what we find is that perhaps the concept of interruption helped us name like moments where like these biases came up and were confronted by a reality. And that goes back to this question that you were having about how is this humanizing. We can think about sort of like the individual level and responsibility that a teacher has towards their students, but we can also think about a systemic level. And what we find is that the systemic level is bringing in all of these ingredients into teachers' work that like create these like things that do interrupt the flow, in addition to the reality of something that is already kind of choppy because it's hard to do, right? So what we think is humanizing about this is that I think that system is dehumanizing for the refugees themselves on the first place because they are the ones that are being the more harmed, but it's also harmful for their teachers. It also dehumanizes them because it puts them in a position in which instead of like really engaging and seeing the other person as like another human being, they start sort of like seeing the system and the bias and the thing that doesn't work and like the scarcity and we don't have enough. And so actually having this kind of interruption, what allows us to do is to talk about how in those moments when they engage with the students and these discourses confront the reality of actually teaching these kids who they seem like, we talk about this so much, they are so committed, they value their work with them so much. It actually rehumanizes the teachers themselves and sort of like, yes, shows that they are imperfect, yes, shows that they have biases, but also shows that they are actually people in flow. They are able to change that. They are also able to sort of work against the system. They are able to be part of communities. So, not necessarily an answer, but a little bit of our thinking.
And I think there's also I think our methodology also put us in an advantageous position to see, like, there's not always a flow, but interruptions, because what I'm trying to say is that the research has a little bit like a longitudinal nature. So it is not like you interview with people for one time and then you analyze that data. It's not like that. So it's like I know those teachers for like 6 years. So over 6 years, we had a lot of conversations, and then like I think you see like over the years you see how actually these fluctuations and interruptions are an organic part of our lives, because like life happens, lots of things are happening and their ideas are changing. And then I think the methodology was also kind of helping us to clearly see how these things are like, changing.
Just a quick microscopic follow-up. So with those interruptions, were those teachers moved to action? I think teaching is very political and is action in and of itself. So don't get me wrong, I'm not saying the alternative is passivity. I think they're very active. I'm just curious about other ways that these interruptions as windows drew them into attending to the systemic, if at all.
Well, again, I think it depends on how we define action, right? I mean, for me, the moments when they start to acknowledge the transformative influence of their students on themselves, I would call it like as an action. So those moments when they start not to position them linguistically as like refugees. So those are like the moments when I would call action. Yeah, so I think this was like happening, right?
For Shapel, first I have so much I want to talk to you about one-on-one. I'm a Cooper scholar, so this was like, yes. So I want to publicly say this in front of everyone. Like, I appreciate you showing up intentionally. I appreciate you showing up in the way that you did to elevate these scholars, to elevate them as philosophers and show the complexity of their work. I appreciate you showing up with your baby. My babies are upstairs. So I'm here with you, and I want to publicly say that because like our presence and the way that we show up is the reason why we're trying to reimagine some things in education, specifically in philosophy. So yeah, I just appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
And like just y'all,
I appreciate you too.
I hope that you all see that she's a rock star. Like the treatment of their work, specifically with Cooper and the faith, and just everything that she talks about. Like I look at her as a foremother in education. I study her as like the ancestral legacy that she has specifically as a philosopher. So yes, this is just rigorous, beautiful work. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your appreciation publicly. Having a sister moment. Thank you.
Here.
Shapel,
was going to ask, I live in Atlanta, and so, and most of us are in the South. What are you seeing in New York in terms of how Black excellence is conceptualized there? I'm sure it might be a little bit different from,
Yes.
a city like Atlanta and
Oh,
some
I
of
know
the
Atlanta was
narratives we
Spelman.
hear around Black excellence.
Yeah, so that's kind of where this idea of Black excellence transformed. I was a student at Spelman College, and in New York, it's a little different. It's a lot of diversity in New York, but I always tell people that Spelman College was the most diverse place I went to in the world, even though it was all Black women, because it was so many different socioeconomic backgrounds. There was so many different global sisters we have. We have sisters from the actual African continent there, and we all had this unique thing to bring to the table with Black Excellence, and you couldn't deny it because we went through that process of like having the particular grades. Like you essentially came from like, I was a high school student and I was the token Black girl when I was there. Okay, you're in all the AP classes and this and that. So Spelman humbles you because when you go to Spelman, everybody has the grades. Everybody was the valedictorian, everybody did the community service. So it afforded us to become more creative about what else can you do. You already have this legacy of Black excellence. What else can you bring to the table? So in New York, I kind of take that as into my practice with working with students who speak multiple languages. I'm an ENL teacher. I lived abroad and I work in New York City. I take the experience of Spelman, the experience of living in Vietnam, in Southeast Asia, and I take it with really making sure, more than anything, I create authentic, respectful relationships with people to break down all the effective filters that people these two sisters talked about in their work with refugee students. There's a lot of things that come into the space when you're teaching people who are different from you. And one of the things in Black feminist epistemology, which I touched on, is like forming some trust, getting back to that humanness, getting to that trust. Like, this is so hard for me. This is the first time I brought my daughter to a conference with me, and I'm just trying to act so normal, like, I'm still talking, but that's what it's about, right? Like, this is important to me, my daughter is important to me, but this work is important to me, and being in this space as one of the people of color here is important to me, so trying to hopefully inspire and be a lived example to other people, especially my students who speak different languages, like showing them that this is, for me, this is Black excellence, but this for you could be, Chilean excellence. This could be Mexican excellence. This could be Yemeni. I have a lot of Yemeni students and Haitian students. This could be your excellence. Always be proud of where you're from. Always be proud of everything in your story, and just walk with that. Walk with that and let it carry you. So that's what I would say to that. Yes.
I have a question. I'm sorry.
No,
I
not
have
you.
a question. I do have a comment of appreciation for all of the presentations in this session. I heard humanization and representation infused throughout all of them, and I think as educators and as researchers, those are things that needs to be the center of all of our work, because if we're doing qualitative work as well here, then humanization is very, very important for the relevancy of the work. So thank you guys for doing that work on that.
I'm just going to point out really quickly, I thought for a moment we were in the Gadamer session, we could talk about philosophical hermeneutics and the openness and dialogue that you found, and I appreciated that. But in my dissertation work, I touched a little bit on Emmanuel Levinas, and it struck me as he was always kind of prided for his introduction of his faith, his Jewish faith, into his work. And I always wondered how that would be perceived with Black scholars, Black philosophers. So it was good for me to see you introduce Judy Cooper, Alain Locke, kind of the faith-based approach that informed their philosophy and work too.
Question for the dialogue group. It sounds like some of them went on to do something after the conversation. I wasn't sure if that was baked into the design, or was it on impulse after dialogue they felt called to be like this gentleman who was conservative and was called to.
Yeah, I think we didn't talk a lot about the program itself, but we specifically recruited student leaders to it. So when it was founded at Alabama, it was during a time of political, it was really in response to the 2016 presidential election and the fractures that were happening on campus. So we formed the program to bring together student leaders across, because we had had a sustained dialogue program on campus for almost a decade, where students were talking about race and sexuality and like having these really, but they kept coming to us and saying like, we can talk about all that stuff, but we can't talk about politics. Like we can't do it. And so we wanted to see if it would be possible to bring students together and have those conversations, and particularly because there was such fracture on campus, to build relationships among student leaders, so that when things happen like in student government, or when there were national incidents around race or politics, which were happening a lot that fall and spring, that they had prior relationships so they could work together and solve in ways that were productive. So I like to say that the students who came, we specifically recruited people who are already exceptional leaders, and so, and also that's like a reflection that we've had throughout the program, is that like dialogue is a process that involves such deep, and I was reflecting on this from the teacher's presentation too, that like you have to really ask a lot of yourself to put yourself into a space where to decide that you might change, to be open to change, is kind of a radical move, right? Especially in our society. And so that's some of the reflections that we've had about our pedagogy, is how do we recruit people who are both across lines of political difference, but also who are open to listening, who are open to change, and who are like interested in having that conversation, not to change the other, but maybe to change themselves. And so I think that's kind of also the ripple of it all, is the kind of students who are involved, which is something we've circled around as we think about kind of the impact of it. It's like, well, what does this mean? If not everybody can do dialogue, does it matter? But I think that this reflections the students really skirted over the surface of is that it does, like I think that those, and again, both presentations were having me think about these small, like the meaningfulness of these small moments of humanization have big implications for how we interact with the world. So I think that we might be at time. 11:16. Oh my gosh, we're a minute over. Thank you all for